And Ram Dass, in front of this group, quipped, "One thing I can't stand is a horny celibate." It's a great line, you know?
That's good.
Horny celibate. I don't want to turn you into a cartoon, but you, in a prior life, were a horny celibate.
Hello all. My name is Teg Prakash. I'm an astrologer here with the Lila team. For this episode, I had the great privilege of sitting down with our astrology maestro and the voice of the Lila app, Steven Forrest. He does a deep dive into my natal chart, focusing mostly on relationships. In this, we get a solid introduction into the arc of intimacy, the part of all of our charts that can give insight into all kinds of relationships, from family to business partners to life mates and everything in between. You'll also get a good idea of how different parts of a chart interact with one another and how a good astrologer can weave it all together. But most of all, this is a really beautiful demonstration of what you'll find inside of the Lila app. In the My Chart section, you can choose any planet and read about its placement in your chart, how it manifests in relationships, and what important connections it makes to other points in your chart, along with tons of other insights, all written in the wise and grounded words of Steven Forrest himself. So if you haven't already, you can download the Lila app for iOS or Android, enter your birth information, and come along for the ride with your own chart in hand. With that, I hope you find this conversation interesting and enlightening and enjoyable. I most definitely did.
So we're going to talk about your love life, right?
Fantastic.
Yeah, okay. I open with a cliche. The birth chart is the soul's lesson plan. It's a deep truth, but it's one of those truths that enters one ear and shoots out the other one. And so we slow it down a little bit. The simple question, okay, so why do you need lessons? And of course, the answer always has to do with ignorance. If you already know something, there's no need to learn it. And so a rather harsh translation of the idea that the birth chart is the soul's lesson plan is a birth chart represents everything wrong with you. And one more phrase, and how to fix it, how to get on with it. It's ultimately an optimistic statement with a useful dollop of humility in it, thus addressing our karmic predicament. All that's very general. But I begin by my presentation to you by observing that your sun, the very center of your inner sky, the thing to which you need to be true if you're going to be on track, there are two things we need to understand about it. One, it's in Pisces, thus the core identity, your North Star in life, your first priority whenever you're on track is your spiritual life, period. Nothing else matters as much. Other things matter. But we also have the sun in the seventh house. And this is traditionally the house of marriage. We'll find it's kind of a bigger concept than marriage. Marriage is too small a word for it, but it's a good place to start. So when it comes to your lessons, when it comes to everything wrong with you and how to fix it, it's as if the gods and the goddesses marched you to the end of the cosmic diving board above Seattle, and their last words to you is, "Teg, I want you to go down there and get married." I'm glad you're laughing. I'm laughing too. It's something of an oversimplification, needless to say, but it does contain some core truth. Here's a more serious way and more general way of saying the same thing, that with the seventh house sun, you've come here to learn two lessons, and they have to be learned in this order. And the first lesson is, whom should I trust? Who is worthy of my trust? And the second is, once I've figured out who is worthy of my trust, how do I do that? What does that look like? which goes back to the gods and the goddesses saying, go down there and get married. I'm making quotation marks around it because it includes friendships, it includes partnerships of all sorts, but who to trust and how to trust. Back to the idea that the chart is the soul's lesson plan. There's some evidence implicit in that when you were born, you weren't too good at knowing who to trust. And I appreciate your smile. Your life has demonstrated that, which, people can use astrology as an anti-personnel weapon, and I'd never want to use it that way. Your life has been an intimate catastrophe. It's probably not even fair to you to say that, but we could find some elements of truth in it. But what that would obscure, and what we cannot lose, is that this is something you're learning, that you're better at this than you were in 1991, so to speak, and not just for the obvious reasons that you were a baby, but the deeper reason that you're an evolving soul. Now, the first thing I said was you're Pisces, and thus the absolute North Star of your life is your spiritual work. There's some other stars in the sky we're going to have to look at, but that is absolutely central. And so when we wrestle with the question of whom should you trust, who is worthy of your trust, it's a little more subtle than just saying, stay away from evildoers and heartbreakers. And that's good advice, but it's a little more subtle than that. That there are many decent, wonderful, loving people in the world who would not be worthy of your trust. Not because they're untrustworthy, but because their path is so different from yours. They're on a different wavelength. One of the most amazing things about this kind of astrology, as far as I'm concerned, is the way your chart describes your natural mate, the natural partner for you. We're going to see a lot here, but right at the top of the list, here's an absolutely dogmatic statement, rigid, no exceptions, and we can take it to the bank. The only kind of relationship that will work for you, like period, is one that has a spiritual basis. That's it. So not to put the jinx on you, but I'm going to imagine you in a doomed relationship, and
And one or two of those.
really rhetoric. This is the moment you figure that out. You're kind of down the road with a person. Maybe you become lovers. All of that. But here's the moment. She says, Teg, I know you're into some weird stuff. I shouldn't say weird, I respect you profoundly, says she, but, reincarnation and meditation and, I don't know, UFOs or something like, all that stuff that you're into. Again, I respect you. Don't get me wrong, says she. But that's not my path, and I think we come together in these really beautiful ways sometimes, you and me. But we're different people and we're both grown up. So I'm not even saying let's agree to disagree. I don't know enough about that stuff that you do to even disagree. And again, let me reiterate, I respect you profoundly, but we're different people on different paths. And now I've heard worse speeches than that. But what she's saying is half of what you are, 2/3 of what you are, is not welcome in our relationship. And so it's like not good enough, It's just a way of kind of exploring this idea that anyone who lacks a spiritual life of their own is not going to be able to relate to you. Let me take this a step further. This is all under the banner of the critical question, who should you trust? the tests that people have to pass. We've just defined one. Here's another. This one can save you a whole lot of trouble. Early in any relationship that has a prayer of being right for you, we would see a moment, which I'll dramatize here. There'd be lots of ways of describing it, but let's imagine a person comes to your house. Let's imagine you have a fireplace. It's winter. You got a fire burning in the fireplace. You've made dinner. You're sitting on the sofa together, gazing into the fire, and 5 minutes go by, not a word between you. Completely comfortable. It's not like awkward silence. It's just the one man and the one woman gazing into the one fire that's been burning since the beginning of human time. The Swahili people in Africa have a wonderful phrase for this. They call it dreaming the fire. So you are dreaming the fire. Now, let me take it a step further. This will be fun. After 5 minutes of this shared magical silence, you're essentially meditating together comfortably. After 5 minutes of that, here's the quote. She says, "Teg, I'm sorry, but I have to go pee." Now, she's not the kind of person who apologizes whenever she needs to pee. That isn't the point. She accepts that this is part of human life. But she's saying, "I'm sorry. I need to go pee," because she knows that something magical is happening between your souls. And she also knows that as soon as she speaks, she brings you back to the monkey world, the Homo sapiens world, as you relate verbally. No shame in that, but it's kind of sad to leave that magic realm. So, Teg, I'm sorry, but I need to go pee. It's a fun story to tell. So human. These kinds of sensitivities exist naturally and spontaneously in anyone who's going to be right for you. And anyone who isn't, however attractive and wonderful such a person might be, if they lack those qualities, the connection will not be established. How to trust? I'm going to shut up for a second and get some reactions from you, but just one more comment. The how to trust, after you get the who to trust right, the how is that any relationship that will work for you is sustained day by day, month by month, year by year, through shared spiritual experience. Meditating together, doing yoga together, Tai Chi together. These would be like officially spiritual activities. Fine, they're on the list, top of the list. But sitting quietly in front of a fire, watching the full moon rise, it's I use the word spirituality, but there's a lot of people who are really spiritual without thinking of it in those terms. Just one final image. Years ago, I saw the late great Ram Dass, and he's in a room like 1,500 of us hippies, and he's just brilliant. And right in the middle of his talk, he sort of gets into this trance-like conditioning, looks off into the distance. We're thinking he's having an acid flashback or something. He had that kind of affect. And then he points to the exit sign in this big hall. And he says, "See that exit sign? Don't believe it." An incredible teaching. We're all spiritual, but somebody who's right for you is consciously and intentionally that. Now, you see how I work. I like to give a big, complicated picture, but any thoughts or reactions? I have a lot more to say, but that's a good place for me to shut up.
Thank you. So are you pulling all of this from the seventh house sun?
Yeah, 100%.
It's a good start. And seventh house, I'm sure we'll get more into it because I've got other things going on other places in the chart, but
yeah.
This seventh house is just part of the arc of intimacy. Did you coin that phrasage?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I wondered about that. So how does how does that kind of progress through that? Obviously, the seventh house is part of it, but then what's the rest? Just
Yeah.
a quick.
Okay. Yeah. That's a big question, you know. So the arc of intimacy, it's actually a group of five houses, all in sequence. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth. They're all about relationship one way or another. Fourth is family. And as any good psychotherapist will tell you, half the trouble we have in our relationships stems from family of origin kinds of issues and themes. And then you could say the arc starts with family, but it also kind of cycles around, ends with family. If we get it right, we establish a home with another person, maybe family, maybe children. Now, you don't have any planets in the fourth house. It's not that it's devoid of meaning or energy. We could talk about it, but we come to your fifth house, which I'm dying to talk about. We got three planets plus the north node of the moon. There we got a ton of things to say about the fifth house. Traditionally, love affairs, although it's kind of a lurid term. Courtship might be a better word. Sixth house, empty for you, often has to do with mentors. It corresponds to Virgo, the sixth sign, which is your ascendant. So, you know, this theme of you being mentored and mentoring others is actually a major theme in your chart. But your sixth house is empty. Seventh house, we just talked about Sun and Mercury there, which we've not mentioned, Mercury in Pisces. And then the eighth house, which really brings us into the mysteries of sustainable sexuality, not just feeling hot for somebody, but the kind of sexuality that passes the test of time. And there, the planet Venus in the sign Aries, which I'm also eager to talk about. So we got, you know, beyond the seventh house and the need to talk about Mercury there, we do have a powerful fifth house focus and eighth house focus. And pick one and I'll launch into it.
Um, Definitely curious, as we'll go in progression to a certain extent, but I'm curious about your thoughts on like a traditionally kind of feminine or softer planetary energy playing out through excuse me, through a more masculine framework, like Venus in Aries or your Venus in Sagittarius or the moon in Aries, things like that. The softer side playing out through the more fiery disposition. What's thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, for sure. Very good question. You've got a mixture of both. You know, there's the Pisces energy is a soft, accepting kind of energy. But then Venus, the goddess of love, in Aries, as you point out, the god of war, in the eighth house, which traditionally the house of death, you know, and the eighth house corresponds to the eighth sign, Scorpio. They're not exactly the same, but your moon in Scorpio and on steroids because it's conjunct Pluto. Now, the moon is often seen as a softer energy. Put it in Scorpio conjunct Pluto in the context of Venus and Aries in the eighth house. And there's a lot of what we have historically called masculine energy in that. I'm personally trying to get away from that language, you know, using the yin and yang or solar and lunar kind of energies because gender language is so loaded nowadays, and we're obviously in a time of change. But there's you know the Piscean energies and to some extent the Scorpio energies in you, which are another water sign like Pisces, are more in the yin, the feeling oriented, consciousness oriented inner life. But there's much in your chart that's kind of balanced in the other direction. It would follow that any partner for you would have a roughly similar balance, you know, so that there would be some ability to understand a, in the old sense of the word, a super feminine woman in the traditional sense, you know, passive, emotional, and baffled by logic. It's total sexism, when we go back into that language. But such a person wouldn't be strong enough for you. A lot of this really comes to a focus in that combination of your intensely scorpionic moon with that eighth house Aries Venus. In fact, let me enter through the Aries Venus, remembering we're in the eighth house context here. And so, as I said a few seconds ago, we're talking about sustainable sexuality. It's like you meet a couple and they've been together a long time and they just seem really right together. A kind of couple where if you might say, if you two broke up, I would lose all faith in love, because it just seems meant to be together. That juice, that's the holy grail of the eighth house. With a planet in the eighth house, the Lord of the universe has encouraged you to try to experience that, right back to go down there and get your ass married.
We're working on it.
Right. But here's where we come to the heart of it. So Aries, ruled by the planet Mars, as everybody knows, the god of war. So your goddess of love, Venus, is in the sign of war. And immediately, we hear that and people are going to be thinking, uh-oh, And I can imagine some astrologer shaking his head or her head, oh, I see conflict in your intimate life, Now, I look at it and I smile and I nod my head and I say, ooh, I see conflict in your intimate life. Same words, but significant difference, different attitude. So here we'll bring us all directly to full understanding. I'm going to start with a statement that will just seem crazy to you. Maybe not. The fairy tale cliche, and they lived happily ever after. The instant reaction, I won't belabor this, is, well, that's unrealistic. Relationships are more complicated. But here's the deeper statement. For you to live happily ever after would make you completely miserable. Again, that seems like a strange thing to say. But as we think about it, to live happily ever after means to live without any conflict with another person, which is to say, without any evolutionary process with another person, to be in total agreement all the time and thus placidly happy like cows in a pasture isn't the way of an Aries Venus in the eighth house, isn't the way of a Scorpio moon, isn't the way of a moon Pluto conjunction, where there is in you a need for more intensity of engagement, more process. And so when we think of Venus and Aries, like intimate conflict, a couple is having a fight, anybody who likes that is a masochist by definition. It's a psychiatric disorder. Intimate conflict is awful, but it comes in a lot of flavors. There are people who are, violent with each other or verbally violent with each other, throwing the pottery and slamming doors, and that accomplishes nothing. But we can imagine a couple having an argument and they maintain eye contact through the argument. They are trying to find a solution. They radiate respect for each other and faith in the relationship, even though they're really angry at each other. And they may use harsh language. They may say, you're such an asshole sometimes, that may be part of it. But the one thing, and this is so telling, the one thing that we don't see in healthy conflict is the eye roll, that I give up, that looking to heaven,
Contempt.
Yeah, there you go. So your natural partner, who you can trust, there's the North Star. We keep coming back to that. is a person who is not afraid of your passion, your intensity, above all, not afraid of your insights into her. Now, she may not always like them, and you may not always be right, but she'll listen without immediately putting up the deflector shields. You know, this is the classic eighth house Scorpio Pluto kind of signature. It's that willingness to hear difficult things. Um, you're demonstrating it right now in front of a cast of thousands watching this Lila podcast, of course, because I'm saying somewhat confrontive things to you. And the vibration I'm getting from you is you're wide open. You're listening, you're acting like your chart, you're acting like a Scorpio moon conjunct Pluto, more capable than most humans of dealing with confrontation, intense subjects, and so on. For you to feel loose and natural and easy in a relationship, the other person has to be receptive on that wavelength as well. And so here we have another facet of who to trust. Now, one comment that I want to throw it back to you. I would imagine that if we could go into your memory banks, we would find relationships foundering on the rocks of catastrophe when you were accused of being too intense, too intense, which is often the sound that defensiveness makes. Does that resonate with you?
Not precisely in that fashion, but it manifested in a different way for me. A lot of, aside from a couple of very early, like teenagehood relationships, I was not in a relationship for like 12 years, I think. But during that time, there was a whole slew of things going on. But there was a kind of inward projection of thinking that my intensity wasn't going to work with people. There was this kind of inability to let that be out and flourish. I wasn't in a place where I had any kind of spiritual support or exposure, really. So I guess there was not much of that. So I spent a lot of my life, one, not trusting people, but more importantly, not trusting my own feeling, my own sense of the intense need to connect and dig and dissect and really get into a relation with someone. But the intensity, since it's become easier for me to express, I've moved more into, it seems like naturally I moved into relationships that were ready to meet that in different ways. But obviously I'm single now, so that we haven't met that one yet. So there's that.
Yeah, gotcha. Here's a question. I'm really curious how you'll answer this. During that 12-year period you talked about, were you conscious of being lonely? Did you define yourself as lonely?
Not in any conscious way. It was, I was using drugs and alcohol throughout the whole thing. So there was not a lot of bright conscious activity.
Yeah, that does take the edge off.
The edges disappear.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were definitely, like, if I think back to it, there were times where I really truly felt that, and I'm sure that undercurrent was there throughout, most definitely. But I was often too inebriated to care. I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Withdrawing from the world is kind of a classic shadow symptom of Pisces energy, mostly because Pisces, you as a Pisces, you bring an extraordinary psychic sensitivity into the world. And that sounds good, and it's essential, it's a tool for the spiritual work. But in this world, being sensitive isn't always a great advantage. We just think of the anger and the horror and the nightmare of life. I can say Gaza, I can say Ukraine, and it's like, oh my God, we're these nasty monkeys killing each other half the time. And to come into this world with sensitivity, it's like, it's yikes. How can I turn this off so I stop hurting? Here's a bottle of whiskey or whatever.
Where's the off button? Come
Yeah,
on.
yeah, exactly, exactly. It's kind of a classic soul cage or cul-de-sac for Pisces. It's good that you've escaped that pattern, and no surprise you have a taste of it. Once
Yep.
again, soul's lesson plan. If you had all this stuff right from the beginning, you wouldn't have this chart. There'd be no purpose.
Yeah, yeah. And it took until it was like seven years ago. Yeah. 7 years ago I showed up in LA and got into yoga and spirituality and started to just operate in an entirely different fashion, which pulled me out of that old escapist mentality. And progressively my relationships, friendships and romantic and otherwise, have all just increased in how like rewarding and satisfying they are for me. So the spiritual element was definitely a missing link for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It is the purpose of your life. If we just to reduce it to one sentence. Let's delve a little deeper. We have that big fifth house, and in your fifth house, Uranus and Neptune in a tight conjunction forms every 171 years. It's kind of a big deal. And then the planets, they're in Capricorn, and then the planet Saturn in Aquarius, just a little bit further on, and kind of squeezed in between that Uranus Neptune conjunction and the Saturn is a symbol called the North Node of the Moon, which is also in Capricorn. Evolutionary cutting edge. Now, that's going to eventually bring us to the south node of the moon, opposite the north node. Usually that's where I start, but here I'm going to start with that fifth house. So has lots of layers of meaning. It's the house of everything that's fun in life, that renews us. It's about joy. It's about creativity. It's a classically the house of children, and you think of children playing, and and if a kid isn't having a good time, kids having a bad time, and that we have a right to be joyful. This is fifth house energy. And so here's a line sort of parallel to my opening line that God kicked you out of heaven and said, get married. It's a slightly oversimplified, but worth saying. God kicked you out of heaven and said, I want you to go down there and have some fun, have have a good time, which of course sounds like kind of a lightweight remark, but it's actually pretty profound. And to understand its profundity, we actually have to head back to that south node. In Cancer, in the 11th house. 11th house, classically the house of friends. Like in the karmic past, you were part of a movement of some sort, part of a group of people. Cancer, there's a sense of the crab with the shell, some sense of being withdrawn from the world. Cancer is ruled by the moon, so that Scorpio Moon Pluto conjunction of yours is part of this, and so the sense of almost like brutally intense inner work in the context of a group of people, the religious movement of some sort, kind of comes to mind here. The asteroid-like object Chiron is on your south node, which in this context suggests that you're wounded by the group. We have the planet Jupiter in Leo, conjunct your south node just over the line into the next sign. Jupiter, the king of the gods, Leo, the lion, the king of the beasts. We got a theme here. Within this group of people, you were a leader. And so we see you as a leader of, if I say cult, that has kind of a negative connotation. I don't necessarily mean it in a bad way, but very, very intense. And here's the critical stuff. Opposite that south node, obviously we have the north node, but that's part of a package with Saturn and Neptune. Uranus may be a little wide in terms of aspects, but I wouldn't mind counting it. So all the stuff that was kind of the brick wall of reality that you're up against, and the Capricorn energy and the Saturn energy, self-discipline, austerity, the spiritual power of the word no. Like when we say no to a temptation, if we say yes to every temptation, there goes our spiritual path, obviously. And so what we see here is that there was an enormous pressure on you towards austerity, towards saying no to your appetites. The fifth house as the house of love affairs, we have an appetite for sexual expression, for the exchange of love. And here we have this sense of a big no. Now, I want to insert here a line I heard from Ram Dass. The second time I mentioned him must be your Pisces aura invoking him. And Ram Dass, in front of this group, quipped, "One thing I can't stand is a horny celibate." It's a great line,
That's
Horny celibate. I don't want to turn you into a cartoon, but you in a prior life were a horny celibate, and sex is a tremendous attachment, and we can see how somebody committed to a spiritual path at some point needs to give up all attachments. And very advanced yogis and teachers and meditators will often choose a celibate path, just non-attachment to the things of this world. But the sexual hungers in us are such a powerful drive, and denying them entails some risks. Plus, I would quickly say that conscious, loving sexual contact with another human being is a sacred yoga. It's a path to God, looking into the eyes of another monkey like ourselves and seeing the divinity in that person at the point of orgasm. Talk about a spiritual practice. But in the karmic past, you were denied that. Plus, you were a leader. So you had to embody the ideals. If the leader says one thing and does another, of course, people's faith is hurt. I don't think you failed, but if every morning I wake up and I lift weights with my left arm, I ignore my right arm, what's going to happen. And in the karmic past, you were lifting spiritual weights every morning, lifting the weights of self-denial. And part of you evolved disproportionately to the rest of you. And so we find this sort of leftover territory, this thing that you need to go back and explore in this lifetime, that has to do with fun, and above all with sexuality. And right at the top of the list, mate selection, dating. God help you.
God help us all.
So where the north node lies, we're numb. It's our cutting edge. looking at the fifth house, pardon me, looking at the fifth house seriously in its arc of intimacy dimension. I used the word dating a second ago. It sounds like kind of a lightweight word, but what a stressful process. What a magical process, like my father almost 100 years ago walks into a room with a buddy, big party, sees this sexy Scorpio babe with long black hair, other side of the room. He says to his buddy, "There's the woman I'm going to marry." Total stranger. He was right. That was my mom, and you've heard stories like that. That's fifth house stuff at its best, but it has another side. One simple principle, Forrest's law here, we kiss a lot more people than we marry.
Yes.
That love and people being attracted to each other and all of that, it's always an experiment. We don't know what's going to happen. And usually it doesn't work out. And that's okay. Not a bitter remark, but trying to find somebody with whom we have that magic. Most of us will have to wrestle with that. But for you, it's absolutely cutting edge evolutionary work. Just kind of cutting to the heart of this. When it comes to mate selection, you suck.
Took me a better part of 30 years to figure that out.
Just add, you're not a hopeless case. You can learn, and that's the North Node. Wherever it is, and we've all got one. There's a kind of ignorance there, but it's a correctable ignorance. And so again, learning who to trust, how to trust. Here in the fifth house, it brings up these early stages of that process, and also informs us that you're up against a kind of core karmic predicament of too much self-denial, too much inexperience, too much austerity in a prior life in the name of your spiritual life. And so we have to be careful that while you honor your spiritual life, you don't slip into the old pattern. You're not supposed to be a celibate in this lifetime. How does this land with you? Does it make sense to you?
Well, 10 of those 12 years where I was not with anyone, I was celibate, not by my own choice, but just by effective drugs and everything else, and my own insecurities. So that kind of, like, as soon as you said the like renunciate past life experience, I was like, yeah, okay, that was thrust upon me by my past lives, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that every bit of that rings very particularly true. Not great at mate selection historically.
Yeah.
Progressively better, I think.
Yeah, yeah. That's life, at least if we're relatively engaged with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've talked about, prior life stuff with a client sitting with me, and they interrupt me and they say, "Are you sure you're talking about a past life? That just happened to me." And that's the point with the kind of karmic side of astrology. The karma has ripened, so it will manifest in this lifetime. It's like we're saying to the universe, set it up again. I want another shot at it. I know I screwed it up last time, but in this lifetime, maybe I can get it right. And so we'll often have similar circumstances. We'll often meet the same people with whom we got into dramas and impossibilities in prior lives. And the whole reason it's happening is that we're more evolved. That's what it means when the karma has ripened. We could say it's bad news, it's coming to get you, and there's some truth in that. But the good news is this karma has not been doing you any good. It's been holding you back. And now you're ready to liberate yourself from it. And so, ultimately, what seems like bad news is good news.
Hmm. The other thing that particularly struck me, the bit about like responsibility being the kind of karmic imprint, like
Yeah,
an overabundance of responsibility, or maybe, self-imposed
yeah,
restriction. Um, I think it took me until like last year. I just While I was moving through a very recognizable pattern in a relationship, um, I was realizing what it was that was getting me in and also out of the relationships, and it it just like it locked into my head for some reason on that day, where it's like it's literally just that I'm terrified of responsibility. That was the realization in that moment. And it wasn't necessarily that I was incapable of living up to responsibility, but the concept of being so deeply locked into something. Um, so it was a powerful realization. I've loosened up and I'm taking a lot more responsibility and I'm not worried about it. But
got it.
still working on it.
Yeah.
Part of that, yeah,
It's a
part of that.
knotty, slippery kind of question for you for sure. I like what I'm hearing, though. It feels like you're on the right track, or I'll scare you a little bit. The
Yeah, bring it on.
Jupiter, remember Jupiter is on that south node, a really powerful Jupiter position. Uh, Jupiter is, of course, a Roman god, the cultural origin of it. But astrology's existed in so many cultures. And among the Jyotish astrologers, the Indian astrologers, they use a different system, but same planets. As I understand it, their word for Jupiter is guru, like,
Hmm.
you would imagine a spiritual teacher of great authority. And so here we have the planet Jupiter, call it Guru, on your south node, that you were identified with Jupiter in a prior life. You're also in a crowd scene, because there's that 11th house. And so I may be going too far with this if we take it literally, but maybe not going too far. That in the karmic past, you played the role of the guru. You were seen as a guru. I think you took the responsibility very seriously, and that's of course to your credit. But what a trap it is to be a guru. You're, if I say you were not worthy of that responsibility in the karmic past, it sounds like I'm kind of in your face about it. It's not that, if I'm reading this correctly, it's not that ego led you to inflating your self image and declaring yourself to be a guru. God knows there's plenty of that in the world, all the gurus with websites, But this, I want to say, it feels like an elected position, like
Hmm.
like others kind of elevated you to that role and you did your best, but there was always this sense, I think, accurate sense of falling short and trying to do something that you are not capable of doing or not fully capable of doing. I always like to humanize these things a bit. So, a quick little personal story. Years and years ago, I was empowered. I was a minister in a technical sense. I was able to do weddings. And so there's a guy who had been a Catholic priest, and he left the order because he fell in love with a woman. They're both very Catholic. She's pregnant and by him, and so there's some enthusiasm for getting married as fast as possible. It's the UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina campus. They go to the Catholic church or chapel there. And the priests are very sympathetic, but we can't do it because there's some piece of paper he hadn't yet gotten from the Vatican releasing him from his vows. But
Hmm.
they tell you, well, look the other way. You can use the church. And so, okay, I became, the officiant. and we get, the families there, big crowd, like 150 people, rather formal wedding, and I'm dressed like a minister with a, cape around me and everything. And it goes, I feel a little like I'm a character in a high school play, frankly, playing I was saying minister because I grew up Protestant, but of course we're in a Catholic church, Catholic families, they see me officiating after the ceremony, shaking hands with everybody, and they're all, thank you, Father. That was lovely. I'm like, 30, 35 years old, and I'm receiving the projection of a Roman Catholic priest. And these guys are like truck drivers from Rhode Island, good people, but earthy people. You hear them the other side of the room. They're drinking a little bit at the reception. They're talking about football, and I hear the word fuck and stuff, so because they're just guys. And then they all, oh, we should go talk to the priest. And the little inner altar boy comes up, and they come up to me, and they're very polite and lovely weather we're having, And it gave me such compassion for Roman Catholic priests and the weird world that they live in with that constant projection of unrealistic, almost inhuman spirituality onto them. That's a Steve story, but my point is it's also a Teg Prakash story, from a prior lifetime. In this lifetime, you still have all those skills, but you don't want to use them because you know what happened last time.
Yeah. And and I like that thought. I've been fascinated by people who become more and more publicly visible, and as they become, whether it's in religious context or celebrities or whatever, politics in particular, it's like the people who are able to do it are the ones who are able to reduce themselves to the most archetypal expression of people's projection, and they stay continually condensing and condensing and condensing. It's a very interesting thing to see.
Very tight shoes sometimes.
Very tight shoes. Yeah, it's a good analogy. That gives me some context for perhaps why I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, exactly. So in this lifetime, you're learning to be looser with yourself, kind of in a sense. If I say more humble, it's kind of what I mean, but it's delicate because in the karmic past, it wasn't that you're arrogant and so that you need humility in this lifetime. I don't think you were arrogant. I think you were more baffled by what had happened to you, and why you were
Generally pious.
Yeah, exactly, and a horny celibate on top of it, I heard a third time for Ram Dass, so you maybe have some karma with him and it's rubbing off. Uh, he's up there. We're all ready to elect him Jesus Christ, of course, because he's just this amazing presence, and he's smart enough. He wants to reject the guru projection, and so in the middle of hearing him talk, he says, the other day I went to see the pornographic movie Deep Throat. And he's talking about he's standing in line. He says, popular movie, a lot of people, waiting to buy tickets. And he's standing there waiting to get his own ticket. And some people come walking by. They're not there to see the movie, walking down the street, and they recognize him. It's like, Ram Dass. They look at the movie marquee. And the impact on me of that part of his presentation was that from that moment on, I would believe anything this man said because he had no need to defend his image as a deeply spiritual guy. He didn't need to tell that story, or maybe he did need to tell it simply to dispel the guru projection. Now, I'm not saying you need to go to dirty movies, but I'm saying if you want to, that's kind of fifth stuff. And as your teaching role in this world evolves, because I doubt you'll escape it, but to make it not the old trap, there has to be this deeply humanly honest quality. And not everybody will think you're very spiritual. How could he be spiritual because he's sexual sometimes? I mean, it's a stupid comment, but there will be people withdraw their respect from you if you're doing this work right. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah. The story of Gautama the Buddha comes to mind. His insistence, it's like, stop following me. Just go figure it out. Seek, not follow.
Right. If you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. So I am a yoga teacher, and an aspiring. I'm an astrologer. That's how I ended up on the Lila team, mostly because I just wouldn't go away. But ultimately, it is my my desire to teach these things in a way that helps people with their own spiritual path and projection. It's been a weird world. A lot of it's been lost. So, but anyway, it bugs me out thinking about the projection of people. I have a permeable border here. I'm all watery.
Yeah, that's the Pisces.
A lot of shit flying at me. Trying to figure out this Earth sign thing. Taurus midheaven, with any luck, helps me out.
Yeah. There's the yoga. The Taurus is the body, the midheaven, your mission in the world. But you also have Mars in Gemini in your 10th house. And so there's three ways to say teacher in astrology. One is Gemini. One is the planet Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, which is conjunct your sun. Everybody's got a Mercury. Yours is really strong, lined up with your identity. And then there's the third house. Gemini is the third sign, third house, house of teaching and learning. There we have your Moon-Pluto conjunction. So everybody's got a Mercury in their chart somewhere. That's guaranteed, but it might not be conjunct the sun. There's no law that says we have to have anything in Gemini, no law that says we have to have anything in the third house. You've got all of those boxes checked. And so the idea that you are a natural teacher, have an instinct for it, that's a good moon word, moon in the third house. The Mars in Gemini, in your midheaven or in your 10th house, the words mean the same thing, suggests a calling, a public mission, that part of what your life is about this time lies in having an impact upon your community. And that impact has a Gemini quality. It's something you teach, something you say, something you write, but it's of a Mars quality. Mars, the god of war, as we saw earlier. Your teaching will not please everybody. The Mars is in a condition called out of bounds. It's extremely far north in the sky. It gets kind of technical, but when a planet is out of bounds, it sort of breaks the rules. It's common with geniuses and criminals. And of course, some people confuse the two words. That there's the maverick teacher who tells the truth as he sees it. And for him, truth is more important than popularity. He's not trying to be mean, but he's not going to compromise the truth. That's Gemini Mars out of bounds. What develops in you as you become worthy of your mission. In that third house, of course, we have famously Scorpio, Pluto energies, interacting with the moon. I talked about them earlier. You're the truth sayer, not here to please everyone, not here to hurt people. That isn't the point, but just truth. The Mercury, of course, is strong in Pisces. And so here, Mercury teacher, Pisces spiritual, the spiritual teacher, it's just astrology 101. But there are spiritual teachers who essentially advocate the flight into light, the escape from our strong feelings. Like I think of a person with excellent reason to hate his father. His father did awful, brutal things to him. And so he's got reason to hate his father. Now, we would recognize that hating anybody is a spiritual impediment. So maybe we say to this guy, you should transcend your hatred. Well, good luck, I can deny my hatred and be a card-carrying member of your spiritual club, I can pretend it's not there, but it's like,
Even for the next life.
yeah, exactly. How do I let go of my hatred? Well, it's a long, funky process, and it starts with admitting it's there. Here I'm saying things that have the basic tonality of your own natural voice, your natural teaching, where it's spiritual, and yet it deals honestly with the human condition. There's Scorpio, and doesn't always tell people what they want to hear. And out of bounds Mars will seem a little weird to people sometimes. It's like, I never thought of it that way. Well, maybe this Teg Prakash guy is right. No, it couldn't be, because nobody's ever thought that way.
Way too out of left field. No.
There's an element of genius in your psycho-spiritual teaching, as it takes form.
Yeah, this has been one of my in terms of like how I can sense it, because it's not real to me until I can feel it. In terms of how I sense it, the Mars Gemini part of my chart is like the hardest thing for me to grasp. Just that, and most of what you said, like trying to figure out, it's like what is my voice, and how is it projected into the world, and getting over the like sensitivity of other people's receiving of it. It's quite the journey. It's still wildly unfamiliar to me, so it's very strange. I'm aware of that needing to develop. That's what I'm aware of at this point.
The birth chart has the soul's lesson plan, once again, we're right back to that. I'm aware, so I speak to you, you're 33 years old, so you're in life's long middle now, certainly fully a man, and yet still in the first half of life. You have North Node plus 2 planets in Capricorn, and Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, classically the sign of the elder. And obviously, you're not an elder in any objective sense of that word at this point. And yet that archetype is strong in you. Whenever I see a lot of Capricorn energy in a person, I'm imagining that their greatest work comes later in life, as your face kind of catches up with your soul, so to speak. But the only trouble with saying it that way is it makes it seem like all you have to do is twiddle your thumbs and watch television until you're old, and then all this happens automatically. And no, you've got to do your work, do the path. but the flower opens, later in life. You mentioned your Mars in Gemini. Here's another dimension of it, right back into our arc of intimacy territory. Mars energy, it's hot, it's passionate. And of course, as soon as I say those words, we're thinking of sex. Mars is a sexual planet. Two people who love each other have sex, and if we were watching, so to speak, we might describe them as making love. That it is relationship building tenderness in their sexuality. And then two people lie down and have sex, and they may love each other, but like that old Tina Turner song, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" Sometimes sex is just a release of primal energy. It takes a lot of trust between people, and to trust each other's bodies and trust you with my body and vice versa, all of that. But that's Mars, the hot face of sexuality. And that your teaching, Mars in the 10th house, would not shy away from human sexuality, that it would be included in the teaching. No shame. No shame unless we deserve shame for exploiting somebody. But beyond that, just honesty and acceptance of human passion. And then in terms of, well, any planet in the 10th house, here's the fun part. Any planet in the 10th house needs to develop in us before our mission finds us, is really the right way to think about it. And so this, just like that North Node stuff, is inseparable from your sexuality. During that 12-year period of celibacy, I just picture your guardian angels kind of patiently filing their nails or something, thinking, he'll get back with the program sooner or later. Gemini needs experience. And the 5th house is experience, in terms of intimacy. And it's a delicate point that I'm driving toward. I would never want to push you in the direction of being opportunistic sexually, taking advantage of people. I mean, obviously that's nothing but bad karma, but I want to affirm the fact that your cosmic instructions in this lifetime included the orders to kiss a few frogs, and see which ones might turn into a princess now and then, and that within the framework of honesty and sincerity, compassion and caring, an affirmation of your right to have sexual experience, your right to say yes to anybody, as well as your right to say no, of course, but that this really has to be affirmed. There's a kind of a pagan quality to your chart in the sense of affirming the body, affirming this world, but you're not good at it because in the karmic past, you were the exemplar of a more austere approach to spirituality. And I don't even want to make fun of that. It works for some people, but you became too attached to that. And so in this lifetime, this more yes to life and yes to the body and dance and eat and drink moderately.
No more of that.
Yeah, you've given that up entirely. I honor that.
More or less. The occasional glass of wine on a holiday, but
Yeah. If you got some history there, it's important to be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you just say? Oh, the austere. I go back to Buddhism. I got this guy back here. The whenever you start talking about like the more austere history, I think about Buddhists, and also the fact that they have to essentially not compete, but prove their skill and their knowledge so that they can rise through the various like ranks of their spiritual path. It's through debate, which is interesting. Another Gemini quality, Mars and Gemini quality. But that's what keeps coming back to mind. It's like I can't help but think I was somewhere in the Himalayas, just wandering around the hills, and somebody was like, "Hey, you look pretty smart here." I just yanked into it. Yeah, that all rings particularly true. It's been a good developmental arc. I'm happy about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I'm like, so I've been seeing you in the background of meetings for like the last year and a half or something.
You've grown from this size on my screen to this size.
Hey, Jupiter and Leo, here we are.
All right. To all of you out there, your time and attention is appreciated. Now that you know probably more than you wanted to know about me, you can have the wisdom of this master astrologer at your fingertips. Download the Lila app for iOS or Android. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more from the team here at Lila.